You found Ask Alice. You found Ask Alice, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the societal currents shaping our lives. We'll explore the often unseen forces at play, go beyond the brief, and examine the research, dissect the data, and most importantly, if you're seeking to understand what's shaping our society, this is the place.
We're tackling a really tough but extremely important topic. We're looking at divorce cases where one partner displays sexually sadistic behaviors. Our goal here is to really clarify the difference between, consensual sexual interests and actual diagnosable disorders, and crucially, how New York state law views these situations. We'll pull out the key points you need to know about what counts as actionable abuse legally.
Right. And it's vital, right off the bat, for you to understand a key distinction. We are absolutely not discussing consensual BDSM here. Sexual sadism disorder, SSD, according to the DSM-5, that's the big diagnostic manual involved, recurrent, intense sexual arousal from someone else's suffering, physical or psychological. But here's the critical part, the absolute threshold. These fantasies or urges must be acted upon with someone who is not consenting, or they cause the person experiencing them significant distress or impairment. And this pattern needs to be there for at least 6 months.
Okay, so you have consensual practices like BDSM, built on things like safe, sane, and consensual or risk-aware consensual kink. It's all about knowing agreement, right? Mm-hmm. So how does that total lack of consent in SSD change everything? How does it become, legally defined abuse instead of just a private interest?
That lack of consent is precisely the bright line. It changes the entire legal landscape. And it's interesting, SSD is diagnosed almost entirely in males. Onset is often around, say, 19 years old. Research sometimes points to differences in brain activation, maybe frontotemporal areas, but connecting it to the relationship dynamic. Well, sadistic behavior often correlates with a really high need for power or aggressive tendencies, and it very frequently overlaps with antisocial personality disorder. That means a profound lack of empathy, no real remorse. So what you often see isn't just isolated sexual acts, but a much wider systematic pattern of coercive control in the relationship itself.
Okay, that makes sense. Establishing that difference is key. So now let's connect this to the legal side here in New York. New York requires a ground for divorce. It's a fault-based state. And the ground of cruel and inhuman treatment seems highly relevant here.
Exactly. Cruel and inhuman treatment, legally speaking, is defined as conduct that so endangers the physical or mental well-being of the other spouse that it basically makes living together unsafe or just improper. It's behavior that's just too harmful to continue the marriage. And this definitely includes mental and emotional cruelty. The statute even explicitly mentions refusal of sex or forced sex under this category.
Right, and the law in New York emphasizes that it needs to be consistent and repetitive behavior. It can't just be one isolated incident. So when you put that together with what you just explained about SSD being recurrent and intense, how does the clinical definition mesh with that legal standard? What does it mean in court?
That's where it clicks together legally. The clinical definition of SSD, its recurrent and intense nature, inherently satisfies that legal need for habitual or consistent and repetitive conduct. It's not just a description. It fits the legal test. And obviously, the non-consensual infliction of suffering clearly meets the extreme nature requirement of the cruelty ground. So this allows a court to formally recognize a pattern of abuse. And that finding can have, really significant consequences for things like child custody, how assets are divided, and even spousal support.
Of course, we have to talk about the person experiencing this. The psychological toll must be immense. We're talking trauma, deep shame, self-doubt, sometimes even problems with memory, feeling unable to stand up for themselves. These aren't just feelings. They create real roadblocks in a legal case.
Absolutely, and that's why a trauma-informed legal approach is so essential. You have to understand how trauma affects someone. Getting corroborating evidence becomes critical because, frankly, allegations of sexual abuse are often met with flat-out denial. So you need to gather things like detailed testimony from the client, of course, but also medical records, physical injuries, yes, but also mental health records, maybe a PTSD diagnosis, police reports if they exist, digital evidence texts, emails, maybe recordings if legally obtained, and, very importantly, testimony from other people like friends or family who witnessed things.
And with all that psychological complexity, what about expert witnesses? How do professionals like forensic psychologists help the court understand what's really going on?
They play a crucial role. An expert can explain the complex dynamics of abuse, why a victim might behave in certain ways that seem counterintuitive, how trauma impacts memory or testimony. They provide essential context for the judge. And we should also mention the immediate protections available. Things like orders of protection, or TLPs, can provide immediate safety through stay-away orders or temporary custody. Violating them is actually a criminal offense. And as we said, proving this kind of abuse directly impacts those major divorce outcomes: custody, where domestic violence must be considered by the court, potentially shifting the division of assets and influencing spousal support to address the economic damage caused by the abuse.
So wrapping this up, it seems the core message for you, our listener, is that the line between consensual interests and a clinical disorder like SSD is absolutely fundamental. It dictates legal strategy and potential outcomes, especially in New York. And proving this kind of abuse takes careful, thorough documentation and an approach that really understands and centers the victim's traumatic experience.
And that leads to a final thought, perhaps, for you to mull over. In our legal system, which often really prioritizes tangible physical proof, what does it genuinely mean to prove the kind of profound harm caused by psychological and emotional abuse, harm that's often invisible to the naked eye?
That's a powerful question.